So, thank you all for inviting me, and congratulations on the grant. As you probably know, this is a hugely competitive grant. They've cut the number that were any age that they offered this year. So it's a real testament to the good work that's already been done and the planning that you all have a grant. Make sure I know how to do this, yes. Award-winning forest ecologist Suzanne Simard, a professor at the University of British Columbia and leader of what she calls the Mother Tree Project, has unearthed a complex underground fungal network through which seemingly independent trees create what she and her team call forest wisdom. The network that is connected by mycelium deep underground. The network signals attacks by pests. It transfers carbon from the mother trees to seedlings, and it disperses the energies of dying trees to the remaining living trees. Being deeply drawn both to this study and to its metaphoric implications, I started wondering what it could teach us about the humanities. It occurred to me that in the humanities, we tend to favor trees and walled gardens, individual effort, and disciplinary autonomy. By analogy, however, Simard's discovery suggests a different paradigm for the humanities, a heterogeneous, interdependent, resilient ecosystem of ideas, practices, education, and employment. Rooted in the cross-disciplinary humanities collaborations, this ecosystem could encompass academic and public humanities, cultural organizations, and public institutions and employers. Grants like this Next Gen Award for the humanities offer us a rare chance to uncover that ecosystem and plant ourselves much more consciously within it. Today, I hope to start digging into that fertile soil in several ways with you. First, I want to offer a provocation for those of you who will be part of the immediate or the dispersed community exploring ways to rethink graduate education with the support of the grant. Then, touching on issues I raised in my last visit last year, I want to offer a quick survey of some of the approaches that people are taking around the country and that we're taking at Iowa as we rethink graduate education in the humanities that I hope will be useful to your committee. And finally, leaping from North American forest to the jungle, metaphorically, I want to think with you a bit about the elephant in many rooms around the country where people are discussing the future of the academic humanities. That is, our explicit and implicit understanding of what defines our disciplinary cultures. Often it seems to me what stands between us and new growth is our interpretation of invitations, calls, and demands for cultural change solely as threats to our identities, our traditions, and our values. To put that in a way gardeners will appreciate, sometimes we get the Roundup out before we look carefully to see whether we're killing weeds or what might have been lovely germinating seeds. So first, I want to take a minute and ask you to become part of my presentation. If you would pull out a scrap piece of paper and a pen, I want to ask you to do a quick exercise. I'll give you a minute. Okay. I want you to just take 1 or 2 minutes to jot down your first thoughts about these questions. When you, or this one question really, phrased 2 ways. When you consider graduate education in the humanities, what are 3 ingredients that are absolutely crucial to a quality PhD program in your own discipline, which might differ from your neighbors? But you might find it helpful to think about this question in reverse, and that would, to restate it, the absence of what 3 ingredients would lead you to say, well, we might as well just shut down the PhD program now. So take just a minute to jot down the 3 things that come to mind. tableau vivant for the camera. Okay, if you think you've got 3 things there, just set that aside for right now. We're going to come back to that. In 2015, 2 different books were published that pushed the conversation about graduate education along the ways. Sidney Smith's Manifesto for the Humanities, Transforming Doctoral Education in Good Enough Times. Seems sort of an optimistic title from since 2016. And Leonard Cassuto's The Graduate School Mess, What Caused It and How We Can Fix It. Both prompted very energetic discussions about graduate education, and both were texts that often were cited in discussions about Next Gen awards and have been valuable to those discussions. Initiatives like the Connected Academics Preparing Doctoral Students of Language and Literature for a Variety of Careers, led by the Modern Language Association, and a new wonderful online set of tools called Imagine PhD, a career exploration and planning tool for the humanities and social sciences, have furthered those conversations and allowed many students to start putting into practice some of the suggestions that we'll discuss today. And both books, of course, were part of a larger, longer conversation about what people sometimes refer to as the ALT-AC, or alternative career movement. As scholars who are attentive to the way language shapes not only ideas but feeling, you can imagine why Jim Grossman, the executive director of the American Historical Association, and the then President Anthony Grafton, challenged that term alt-ac in their now widely shared 2011 Chronicle Higher Ed article, No More Plan B, a very modest proposal for graduate programs in history. Why, they argue, should any and every career for historians be the alternative to being a professor? Could we instead use a vocabulary of choice to suggest that PhDs in the humanities could use opportunities available to grad students while they're in school to prepare for a range of diverse careers, for various paths to myriad professions? Building on that theme, along with the authors of these 2 books and many others, they called on faculty members teaching grad students to consider how grad programs might create those pathways by changing curriculum, by changing departmental requirements, and by reimagining their mentoring practices, all in the service of helping students adapt their graduate education, not end, adapt their graduate education to a variety of purposes and practices and positions. In the last 2 years, I have found myself making another big conceptual leap. I was telling people last night that I take a real pleasure in the Jeremiah theory of literature, where the way you encourage change is you offer people a vision of the most extreme and dire possibilities, and suddenly moderate change seems really comfortable. So that might be what I'm doing with myself here, not with you all. Confronted by the political turmoil in the United States, by the rise of authoritarian governments around the world, and by the daily shock of racist, sexist news stories, I've actually ceased to focus myself on arguments that suggest we need to offer new forms of graduate education specifically to compensate for the absence of tenure-track jobs in the humanities. That's still true, and we do still need to do that, but that's no longer my main motivation for thinking about change. Instead, I want us to prepare historians, literary scholars, philosophers, anthropologists, communications and media experts to be out in the world in every conceivable workplace. I want humanists in government, in public policy conversations, in NGOs, in libraries, in publishing and media outlets, embedded with teams working on issues of sustainability and the future of technology and genetics, in every space where crucial decisions are being made that would benefit from a deep understanding of history, ambiguity, unexpected consequences, overlapping systems, that would benefit from an ability to synthesize very complex materials and make informed, evidence-based arguments. Sites that would benefit from an insistence on interpretive comparative meaning making and from deep listening to multiple perspectives, all that I associate with the humanities. In addition, to be perfectly candid, I also want to ensure that humanities departments remain more than just service units covering undergraduate general education classes, what we often refer to as the service classes, as important as they are. Because I think that is a perfectly plausible scenario for 5 years from now at a number of universities and colleges, if we don't take it on. Connecting traditions of graduate education with an understanding of the skills that are a part of all the work we do, and then considering how our methods and those multidimensional skills inform more forms of work than teaching and research alone has become one of my driving passions these days. I realize that there are some people who would argue that I'm instrumentalizing the humanities, but I see it differently. I actually feel a sense of genuine wonder that what we do could matter so much to so many people. That what we do could have a demonstrated value if we focus some of our attention on the work of translation, of connection, of mapping the ecosystems in which we work every day. Would that really be so difficult? And if it would, why wouldn't it? When I consult with faculty members around the country who are also thinking about changing their graduate programs, I often see one of two approaches to reimagining the humanities PhD. And I talked a little bit about this the last time I was here, so forgive me those of you who were in that at that talk. The extraneous events approach I subcategorize as either the additive approach or the peripheral program requires very little effort of faculty. The DIY approach, one subcategory, assumes that students will find their way to the Career Center or a standalone How to Write a Resume department session. All useful things. And let me just walk through quickly what I see here in the additive approach. So some examples of this are, you all are incredibly lucky to have really great people in a graduate career services center. That is not typical. It's already a leap ahead. A lot of departments are adding skills workshops. It's left up to students to decide whether to take them, and they're usually not taught by faculty members, so they remain oblivious to what's happening. Departments might, or universities, invest in really great resources online, like the Versatile PhD. You all probably are members. But in the additive approach, the extraneous approach, curriculum practices roll right on. People assume someone else will take care of whatever is needed to prepare students for a variety of careers. And there is no credit and no extra funding for the students. And the assumption is that students will just add this on to everything else that we already expect them to do, which is obviously not good. Peripheral programming is the second general category of things people are doing around the country. And in this case, we ask students to add courses to a gluttonous sideboard of extra departmental training in the digital humanities, pedagogy, public engagement. And the peripheral programming is often dished up as graduate certificates or unpaid internships. In both cases, degree and dissertation requirements are unyielding. Additional funding or extended time to degree are unavailable. So again, the students are being asked to do more. Meanwhile, even as humanities enrollment shrink, outside the academy, we've got audiences filling museums, public libraries. TED Talks are, widely circulated. Public library events are the most popular in my town, in Iowa City. I often host my center events there for that very reason. So the question is, how could we reshape, rather than just slightly tweak in the models I've just been describing, programs to secure a space in that larger humanities network where people are obviously interested in some form of participation, non-academics. One intriguing alternative to these programs I've been describing, the additive and peripheral programs, is the Mellon-funded Humanities Without Walls Pre-Doctoral Career Summer Diversity Workshop. Quite a mouthful, sorry. This is a collaboration of 15 Midwestern universities that are doing a number of projects together with Mellon support. And we've had this summer institute, this 3-week institute in Chicago for about 5 years now. And this summer, it's open to schools or to students across the country, to PhD, students in PhD programs. And I know you all are working on nominating a student to go forward to that competition, which is great. And this program is so interesting because, of course, thanks to the generosity of Mellon, students get a stipend and paid housing for 3 weeks in Chicago. And while they're there, they have the opportunity to meet with all kinds of leaders, especially in the cultural sector. So museums, publishing houses, organizations like the American ARL, Research Libraries organization that has headquarters in Chicago. So they're learning about the careers that exist from cultural and business leaders all across the city. And every summer when we visit, these students are so inspired and excited about feeling suddenly very competent in multiple arenas. One of the things the students do in this program that we could all be doing right away is during the summer while they're in Chicago, they have to make cold calls to 2 people they would like to meet in 2 different professions and ask for an informational interview. This is one of those things that doesn't exist in our world, but exists everywhere else in the world. And so they simply go and meet for half an hour with a successful person running a library, or our Iowa students last year both ended up interviewing as one of their people, the director of the new Writers Museum, American Writers Museum. And the interviews are for 20 minutes, I think, technically, and both students ended up having hour-long conversations. What's even more amazing, and again, something we don't know in the academy, is that in past summers, a number of those informational interviews have actually led to jobs a couple of years later. So while we have a very systematic and possibly more equitable approach to applying for jobs, interviewing for jobs, and getting those jobs, in much of the many other sectors, that is the superficial way that the job market is supposed to happen. But apparently the percentage of people who get jobs from applying somewhere online is pretty minimal. And relationships are seen as the most important way to get jobs. Now, does that sound like an unfair old boy network? Well, that's the worrying side of things. On the other hand, what I think my students were learning is that it's also a matter of your initiative. They're learning, I would love a job in a sector like that. It is my job to become a researcher, to go and learn about that sector. And then the other wonderful thing they do at the workshop in Chicago is students spend a day with IDEO, a design thinking firm, and they actually revise, as you all probably do at the Career Center with Lynn, they revise their CVs and reshape them in ways that will make them more legible to other people out in the world. And as most of you know, probably from the discussions around this reshaping graduate education, the simple shift is a shift basically from here's the content, here's what I study, here's the subject, here's my argument, which is what we tend to value in our world, to boom, in doing this, in developing that research project and the work idea, the research, the writing, here are the skills that I learned. And so that means suddenly what a project that might actually interest only 200 or 300 people around the country, which is fine, but it's a small circle and most of them can't employ you. Suddenly that same project has implicitly, along the way, given you capacities and abilities that are highly valued in a lot of other sectors if you can figure out how to explain that side of the work you've done. And that's a lot of what I suspect you'll be thinking about, how to make those translations with the next gen. As part of your work on the Next Gen grant, you'll probably be considering other experiments that departments elsewhere are conducting. And as I mentioned the last time I visited, I've been kind of collecting a list, and some of the examples of what people around, departments around the country are doing are many of the same things that I think that you all have on your docket. And so just as a quick list, connecting with alumni in a whole new way. And I'm frankly ashamed of the fact that my departments, my various departments I'm familiar with, have only stayed in touch for the most part with people who have academic jobs. They know how to find them. And part of what we're all realizing now is what a incredible treasure trove of knowledge and information we gave up when we didn't keep track of everybody. So a lot of people are really working on learning from their alumni in and out of academia. One of the real shifts, even in the humanities, especially digital humanities, has been toward collaboration and projects working with other people. Seeking grants like this one that require you to work with other people. We're used to working very autonomously. And as we all know, even from just serving on a short-term committee, that experience can either be an awful lot of fun, honestly, or absolute misery, depending on whether the people in the room have the skills to work with other people and know how to make work happen efficiently and collaboratively. So those are things that we can learn. I can't decide what language to use, and I'll be really interested as y'all think through this grant. We're so, nervous in the humanities about the word skills. I'm nervous about the reasons we're nervous, but that's a whole other level of metacognition. But what, and then competency somehow sounds like a low bar. I keep trying to think of a word that would make sense to us, a category. Literacies, again. But that's something that if you all can come up with what it is we want people to learn, that is what we do in order to make projects happen across the subject matter of projects. You will do all of us a huge favor. And one of the things that I hope we're going to do together here, elsewhere at Iowa, is to try to shift the way we work, and I'm saying this very loudly to you fellow administrators in the room, to shift the way we work from what I think of the chronicalization of higher education. I love the chronicle of higher education. It is a secret pleasure. But I also see the ways that we grab ideas out of the chronicle. It's already been proven that 2 years ago at X institution that it really doesn't work that well. And we still just, that's an idea out there, we'll try it here. Instead, what if we look at our own local landscape and try to design things like a new way of doing graduate humanities that uses what we've got distinctly and individually in a brilliant way, so that you do what you could do here in ways that would be very hard for me to do at Iowa and vice versa. At the University of Iowa, for example, we work in an environment that has uniquely intertwined arts and humanities programs, including treasures like the Center for the Book, a really great art museum, a very funky natural history museum. We have a digital scholarship and publishing studio, a public policy center, and we have a lot of different writing programs, although only the Writers' Workshop seems to get attention. So we actually have about 4 or 5 other great writing programs. And we are learning, now that we're paying attention, that we have a wealth of untapped alumni as well as growing expertise in fields like public history, oral history, and publicly engaged scholarship. So I've proposed to colleagues in the arts and sciences that we actually try to unearth and cultivate that local ecosystem by simultaneously tapping individual exercise, but also thinking of ourselves, faculty, staff, students alike, as co-learners. In other words, if we really want to rethink graduate education in humanities, we all need to become students again, which actually sounds like a pleasure. Faculty and staff will learn from grad students and alumni what skills and support graduates need to turn traditional humanistic knowledge and skills into new forms and purposes. Public partners will help faculty and students align graduate education with the aspirations of specific workplaces. Instructors will expand their repertoire of assignments and forms of communication as they work with digital librarians and colleagues in sciences. Together, I hope that at Iowa we're going to draw on valuable new resources that tell us who we are, like the Humanities Indicators Project, as disciplines, as programs, as students, and as employees. Our hope is to strengthen existing graduate programs while also opening pathways to careers in the nonprofit sector, government, public policy, libraries, technology, and institutional education and research, among other possibilities. Part of becoming students, again, will be acknowledging what we do not know how to do well. As the book Sustaining Interdisciplinary Collaboration, A Guide for the Academy, a great book that came out in Illinois last year, or a couple of years ago, makes clear, collaboration really does require extended conversations to ferret out conflicting expectations and to shore up the hard work of culture change as well as specific changes. Teaching the skills required for successful collaboration is a big part of what we do at the Overman Center that I direct, our Center for Advanced Studies and our Humanities Center essentially. So another program that we've led that has been very successful is the Graduate Institute on Engagement in the Academy. And it's not career focused, it's really focused on helping graduate students think about how to build public engagement into their teaching and their research or arts projects. But through that institute and training about 250 students over the last decade, motivated faculty, staff, and students have become participants who collaborate with community partners, our homeless shelter, writing project, for example, to enrich the graduate students' research while also contributing to the public good. Students have to pitch their ideas, manage projects, clarify how the project furthers their research agenda or their teaching commitments, not set aside from those things. They have to explain to us how they will manage a project while they're in good standing as graduate students, and how they're what kind of results will come of the project that must include knowledge dissemination in the same ways we always expect, while also contributing in some way to the partners they work with out in the community. Alumni from this program tell us that the combination of theory, case studies, activities inspired by theater and dance, training in the skills needed for collaboration, and hands-on experience actually turns them from passive to active agents in shaping their own graduate education. And I have to say, the alumni who come back, including those who've gone on to academic positions, they have one piece of advice. And I want to emphasize this because it runs completely contrary to the advice many faculty give, they tell us, and they tell the other students, take every opportunity you see while you're a graduate student. If you have an opportunity to serve on a committee, to participate in some community-based activity that you're interested in, just do it. Because they tell us over and over again, it gives you a set of relationships and helps you implicitly develop a set of skills, even when you're not concentrating on it, that will be so useful to you at the other end when you're on the career path, even if you want an academic position. I think as faculty, we have the tendency to say, ignore everything, just write your dissertation. There is so much research to suggest that that is really bad advice. As you know from being a working person yourself, in fact, what we all have to do is learn how to manage time, not avoid work. That's just not a useful solution. So I just want to mention how many of our alumni tell us that. As I mentioned, the Obermann Center is also a partner in the Mellon-funded Humanities Without Walls consortium that's led by Professor Antoinette Burton at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Both that and Humanities Without Walls and our Graduate Institute demonstrate the powerful impact that results when graduate students learn with and from allies in the public sector alongside their faculty and fellow students. Many students who seek out these two unique opportunities have long desired to pursue careers outside the academy. And that's another shock, or was another shock for me, is to find out there actually are a surprising number of people in PhD programs who do not really intend to apply. If they apply for faculty positions, it's more out of pressure than it is desire. They actually want to do other things. And we need to learn from them, why are you here? What are we giving you that you have decided would be useful in other contexts? The next, sorry, I lost my place there. In addition, the University of Iowa was a recipient of a recent Engage grant, Next Gen grant we had 2 years ago. And in our case, our grant stressed modes of writing that humanists now engage in regularly but don't tend to think about as part of their academic writing, which can go right down to the level of Twitter, although that's kind of a nervous-making word these days. Led by Professor Judith Pascoe in collaboration with our Digital Scholarship and Publishing Studio, that grant paved the way for new collaborations and uses of technology in the graduate classroom. So more people, especially in the English department, are weaving kinds of writing assignments into student projects, only along the way to an article-like essay, because of that Engage grant and the experiments people conducted. Speakers who visited as part of that grant encouraged students to experiment with forms and formats from Twitter to graphic dissertations to virtual exhibits that articulate an argument. They modeled the power of digital literacies and the impact of the career tools and advising tools that we could all be building into our regular curriculum and that are done for us. We just have to learn how to use them. The Next Gen work initiated a collaborative, reflective, thought-provoking strategy that we plan to continue. And we hope that these various building blocks will create a firm foundation for a new generative, cross-disciplinary, very participatory humanities program for students who want to leap into process, practice, and project-oriented work, as well as writing traditional articles. Now, skeptics very reasonably ask, but do these other careers exist? That is a fair question. So I wanted an answer before I argued that we should change the way we do things. And I set up a whole series of focus meetings with leaders in a nearby city, Des Moines. And I talked with, again, directors of museums, education centers, nonprofits, a couple of people in public education. And part of what was really, directors of the State Humanities Council, part of what was really fascinating was how many people were thrilled by the idea that I might be able to help put interns in their sites. And so we're in discussions now about how we might do that, but what was humbling to me was that as I, and I kept telling them, now we're not talking about undergraduates that will do work you're familiar with and that you could use as, to just run errands. This would have to be substantive work with highly specialized people. But their response to that was to be thrilled at the possibility of having interns with deep cultural knowledge, research and analytical skills, and real writing abilities, and all the projects that they have had on back burners that they might be able to do with these internships. We also discussed the fact that if we can figure out how to do this, we are going to actively co-mentor the students who are working in the internship sites. And that's back to our being students again. That means we can learn from the students, what's working, what's not. We can learn from the partner, what the needs are in that area that we then bring back into the classroom. And they can learn more about what a PhD is and what kind of work we're doing. So turning students loose into an internship would be one strategy, but forming a co-learning situation that involved this kind of mentoring and co-mentoring of each other, I think would be a very different experience. So let me just quickly tell you about some of the experiences some of the projects that I hope we're going to undertake at Iowa with the grant that we have. That has not been technically announced yet, but we have. So we're calling our initiative Humanities for the Public Good, and it will create what I think is a 21st century humanities ecosystem of faculty, staff, administrators, and students, and alumni who are going to work with future employers to create a PhD program that demonstrates why universities and state legislators not only should, but must support education in the humanities. And so here's my Jeremiah. I'm going to try an experiment that is probably more radical than you would want to try, and probably than most of our faculty will want to try. And that is, we are going to experiment to see if we can actually create a multidisciplinary PhD that would be in the graduate program. You probably have something that we have, which is one of those programs where the student builds a PhD themselves by pulling together people from different departments. So one of our STAR students who did this was an artist and a scholar who wanted to use gaming to transform the way communities think about sustainability issues. She wanted to do all of that. And so she ended up working with a whole array of people and had an advising committee, a doctoral committee from 3 different departments, and they had to negotiate out what she would do. So in some ways, this is a proposal to take that program and make it a small cohort program instead of every individual having to do this on her own. Now you can imagine what the obstacles are. The first one's funding. Where's the money? The second one is departments worry you're going to take away students. But the way we're imagining this program, we would actually use a number of classes in different departments as the real content area of specialization. So we think we will actually bring people to classes rather than take them away. We also hope that through a series of summer workshops for faculty, we come up, but those workshops will include staff with expertise and alumni, that we can design some modules we can drop into different classes, like new kinds of assignments, instead of always doing everything. Having to write a 25-page paper in 10 different classes isn't not that necessarily, when you could be learning a range of things. And so we're imagining a kind of introductory course that tries to pull a number of these things together, including introduction to skills and careers, right at the beginning, so that when students walk in the door, and this could be taken by students in any discipline, when students walk in the door, they're being told immediately, we assume you are here to learn multiple things alongside your area of specialization. It turns out that a group of scientists at Iowa have gotten a grant to do something similar with a range of sciences, and they are especially interested in publicly engaged practice. And like me, they are thinking of preparing future faculty, but also preparing a range of people for all sorts of career opportunities. And so there's now a planning group where we're trying to share ideas with the sciences about whatever we might have in common. So there might be some things that we have in common. So this is the Jeremiah version of the radical experimentation that not many places will want to try, and that may fall completely flat at Iowa. We'll try it for a few years and see if there's interest. But one of the reasons I'm interested in doing that is because I feel like what we're doing now, and the reason we're hung on the all-DAC hook, is because the possibility of preparing for diverse careers doesn't arise for most graduate students until they've decided 3 or 4 years in that they might not get, that they likely will not get a tenure track job. And that means that any experience you have of considering a range of careers is, the first experience is failure. I couldn't do that, so I will have to take an alternative. I want the program I'm imagining to start with the assumption people are here to get a PhD for different reasons. And you bring to this program your expertise. The second big challenge will be funding. And, thanks to Mellon, for a while, that won't have to be an issue because we've tied so much of our graduate funding to teaching. And we are about to embark on the resource management budget that you all have enjoyed for some time now, which does not support creative work and interdisciplinary collaboration. It's not unless people work very hard at doing so. And so one of the things I'm going to do on campus is talk to offices around the campus to see if I can convince people, and I've already had good luck with this, that the library might want to hire a graduate student at a teaching assistant salary to work in the digital studio for projects for a year, for projects they wanted to do. The Office of Institutional Research might want to hire a really great writer, PhD student, or historian to work with them to do projects they have not been able to do. But also, there's a lot of potential for short, intense summer internships of the kind I was describing a minute ago. And while I had concerns about what could you actually learn in 2 months, is that really a useful summer experience, I decided 2 things. One, after reading around a bit, I decided, yes, that's a simple answer. Yes, you can learn a lot in 2 months. I also decided that would be a much easier model for getting funding to do something unique and exciting, because with $5,000 per person, you can pretty much do what you want. At least you can in your life. And so that's just a quick overview, because I don't want to keep reading at you all about some of the projects that we are going to experiment with that, like I say, could go terribly, terribly wrong. And I will make sure all the students in that program get taken care of and are carefully mentored, so that they're the only ones I'm concerned about absolutely not suffering. We're also going to do several other things. We're going to try to do a version of that graduate institute I was describing to you for faculty. We did this once 10 years ago for faculty who wanted to learn how to do publicly engaged work. So one of the aspects of career diversification I want to push against is the fact that in most universities I'm familiar with, it has happened around and behind faculty. Faculty are responsible for that in large part because they have not asked to be involved. So I'm going to try to think with the group about how do we first interest faculty in wanting to learn more about other careers. If I could, I would actually have faculty out there being interns one summer. Because I think we need to do to ourselves what we are asking our students to do with themselves. What I hear all the time from students now is they will go to a faculty member and say, I'm kind of interested in thinking about a job in publishing, for example. And the faculty member, out of the best intentions in the world, will say, I think that's a great idea. I just don't think there's a career services office on campus, that too, DIY. And the way many students hear that is, I don't think this is important enough for me to learn anything about good luck. That is not necessarily what a faculty member means, but that's how I can tell you it is almost always heard. So if faculty, we don't have to become career advisors, we should probably not do that, but if we can learn enough about what the opportunities are to be informed advisors, I think we could really change significantly the way things work. I know that time's passing by, so I'm going to jump ahead and wind up here. Take the advice of the student I mentioned, Erica Damon, who has worked on a number of, who got an interdisciplinary PhD that she created, and who went to the Humanities Without Walls workshop. She has really suggested that taking 2 internships would be ideal, because if you're introduced to one other alternative, you really have a very limited knowledge. And part of what has been wonderful about Humanities Without Walls is students come home with such a wide, varied sense of what their future might be. And I would love to be able to practice, to offer that to the students. So let me just wrap up so that we have time to talk with the obstacles that I think will all be facing. We know what most of them are, the knowledge gap, what faculty in particular don't know about other jobs. But I really think that in some ways an even bigger obstacle is what I would call affect, both on the part of the faculty and the students. So a lot of people who try these programs are shocked to find students don't immediately show up for that first workshop. But imagine you've told a group of people to come and study in your program, to be a professor, doing a certain number of activities and writing and doing research, maybe teaching. And then suddenly they see a workshop on skills. Why would they go to that workshop? Nothing in your admissions, nothing in your advertising, nothing in class discussion has indicated there is any value in any work except content knowledge. So I think, so the first response is, oh, they're probably offering that because they think we'll never get a job. As opposed to, they're probably offering that because they really think there are a lot of possibilities out there if we can prepare for them. But affect should never be dismissed as inconsequential. We've already been talking about the structures, the funding, and the way that makes it difficult to experiment. I would say that the milestones we use to mark success in a graduate program are a real challenge. So if the only way to mark successes in a graduate program is to pass your comps exam, pass a dissertation defense, and write a monograph, there is nothing in those milestones that says to anyone there is any value in work other than exactly the kind of work that has been being done for the last not so long, 50 or 60 years in graduate departments. And so this brings me to my conclusion, which will seem a little far afield, but I think is actually right at the forefront. What we're really wrestling with in many ways is culture change. And that's why I asked you to jot down those notes on that sheet at the beginning, and I want to come back to that after we take a quick look at this. I love the fact that we in the humanities study culture except our own. And one of the really powerful things that anthropologists discuss, that people who study all kinds of different institutional cultures discuss, is the fact that culture actually resides in largely unstated values and practices, so that we operate in most contexts in some set of norms that we only discover when somebody violates. We don't know we have rules. And so when someone from the outside is critical of how graduate education is being done, in some ways they're partly attacking our norms And so we're figuring out what those norms are. I think, honestly, to go anywhere very significant in a group, the group has to stop and reflect on itself and reflect on what the norms are. Because it's very hard to make any kind of, to even contemplate a change if you haven't figured out why your first reaction to the change is negative or skeptical. It's also, it becomes a kind of interesting research project if people can take it on without feeling personally attacked. And that's another reason I think it's valuable to look at culture rather than, why do? You won't let us do anything, or you are trying to destroy the English department's standing in the world of the Modern Language Association. If that conversation can move to what are the cultural norms that we want to hold on to, and are there practices that we would like to change? I also think that it really is critical to, this is facetious, but to take affect into account and to get people to acknowledge when are they holding on to an idea because it's a good idea, and when are they holding on because they feel defensive and attacked. What I've been doing for 30 years, suddenly you're telling me it's not valuable. Doesn't seem to feel well. So I hope that as you move forward, one of the things that the committees will do is to really take on that issue of culture and make that an interesting research project. That's what I'm going to try to do at Iowa, and I can say it blithely when I encourage you to do it. I can feel myself get nervous when I think about what it's going to take at home, but I really do think it's important. And the process, it seems to me, is recognizing what your culture is, considering alternatives, not that you have to do, but just what are other people doing elsewhere that might be attractive, or why would you reject it instead of just, we don't do that here. And then figure out if we do want to make some changes, what are the strategies we would need, and what are the practices we would put in place? And that's actually where you finally get to, let's start a skills workshop. That's where we tend to start, but actually that is pretty incidental to the other kinds of change that have to happen for anything beyond the most superficial change in a program to take place. Okay, so I want you to pull your crap out, your paper, and I want us to just take a minute for you to get your mind back to that, and then I think we've got some time for conversation. And look at your 3 ingredients, and then take a minute to jot, if you didn't already, why those ingredients matter to you. You might have just listed what they are, but why. So now you're thinking about back to culture. What is it that makes these ingredients meaningful? And then take just a second to chat with the person next to you. And know that we do this to our students, but this is about modeling the kind of learning we want to happen. I'm going to make you guys do what you're going to do with your students. Just take a minute to talk with whoever's sitting close to you about what your three ingredients were, and then we'll talk as a group about that. So jot down why. Grab the person next to you, and I will just give you like 3 or 4 minutes.
I just want to know how much.
Okay, so let's hear back from the groups, but also make sure we have time for people to ask questions, because I know there are many, about how any of this could happen. Not that I have answers, but collectively, maybe we can hope answers. So can I just pop around to a few of the groups in here? So what did you guys think, just as succinctly as you can, what did you guys think were the critical ingredients? And it would be helpful to hear your discipline problem. You're going to need to kind of yell.
So the 3 that I identify as essential, first, hands-on engagement between faculty and students. It's sort of collaborative atmosphere that students feel encouraged to connect with their advisors and other concerns. connections between the academy and the outside world, fostering special programming, also the coursework that students are involved in, and then lastly, interdisciplinary focus. So I talked about Haskell School, that's social sciences, but there's a real interdisciplinary culture that's encouraged there. And some of my own work also overlaps with English work a little bit. Sorry, yeah.
I'll just sum up real fast, shall I? So interdisciplinarity, close working relationship with faculty and students.
Connections between
And linking the academy with the outside world. So in a way, it sounds like that's a fascinating trio of ingredients. That sounds a lot like where some of this is headed. What about other people? What are some of the ingredients that? Yep.
We're religion history that we realized we could come up with across the world was teaching, mentoring, research. So it was all knowledge and teaching focused.
Teaching, mentoring, and research.
Mentoring of students.
So the mentoring and student-faculty relationship, that kind of is interesting. But other people? Pauline?
Sure. My field was information science, so it's kind of the combination of all fields at the University of Michigan. And one of the things that I felt worked really well there was how every course had a partnership with a local business. So we had to produce work that was for a client in our coursework, and I just thought that worked so well. And then that worked hand in hand with our internship. So I guess that connection with local industries, businesses, nonprofits, I just can't say enough good things about what I learned through that program.
And you all probably know Colleen, abandoned Iowa. Now their special collection. We're very lucky.
And I'm sure that exists elsewhere.
Others.
We had a lot of funding.
Funding.
Adequate funding. In other words, if you want time to completion and you want to look pathways and traditional pathways, you got resources and funding for the students. And I'm talking to the front of the room and no one can hear me either. And so I just want to remind people that we also have a Humanities in New York Public Graduate Fellowship in Humanities, and that call will be going out. And lots of doctoral students from different disciplines across the university are eligible to apply, including 3-year MFA programs, because that's the terminal degree in those areas. So the call will open in the fall. We have representatives from Humanities in New York in the room, and graduates and alums from those programs. And so we have some opportunities here, plus the HWW Humanities Without Walls nominations going forward. Just reminding you there are some local options too.
And funding.
On funding, since we're talking about it, parity, equality among the graduate students, like equal funding, or simply they are all funded so that there's not competition for funding among them, which can have a tendency to prevent collaboration and leads to people tearing pages out of engineering books in the Cornell Library, according to that. So if people have at least a semblance of economic parity where they're not all fighting for a limited number of TA lines and there's more students than there are TA lines, there's more environmental encouragement to collaborate rather than compete with other people in your own program, let alone the rest of the university.
And that sounds like a great example of what people need to look at locally and think about particularly. Yes.
In addition to skills that matter to the public or to the world, also scholarship that matters to the public.
And would you say that is what you see as a key ingredient of a good humanities doctoral program?
It would be, yeah, I think probably some do it a little better than others, but I think sometimes we say, we'll do our really arcane scholarship and then we'll talk about our transferable skills, but not the content that we did. But what if the content was also something that could be kind of ported to other circumstances and jobs and things like that.
And I don't know if have you all ever had the op-ed project here? One of the things, it's not very much the last, but one of the things that I'm going to do as part of our program is invite them to campus again. So this is a group of journalists who got started because they realized that only 17% of the op-eds published in the country back in the 90s were by women or people of color. So 80% of all op-eds were published by white men. And that meant all public opinion was being formed by a pretty particular group. And so they train people how to write not just op-eds literally, but opinion pieces more broadly, using their expertise. And it's absolutely fascinating. I've been to several of their workshops, and I watched a Pulitzer Prize winner break down in tears because it was the first time she had ever thought the work she did had any value for public opinion. And so a lot of what they do, and that's not unusual in their workshops, but what they do is try to get you to think about the way the world argues now as if everything is X or Y. You can take your expertise, ceramics in ancient, in 17th century China, and you can come in at a slant and use that perspective to open up a new way to think about that conversation that's happening right now. And they get everybody in a room of 20 people able to do that. So it's an amazing experience of recognizing the value of what we often think of as so highly specialized that there would be no use. So just a great reorientation. Other people. I'm really surprised. Oh, yes.
Well, if I don't know if this fits in what you're saying right now in terms of observations, but I just want to know, my home department is physics, and a lot of what you're saying here carries over directly. I mean, maybe the plan B options for students have higher pay than humanities. But honestly, because one of them go directly in computer programs where they've developed that as a lab skill or something like that, and that's just like the automatic path for an alternate career. In terms of faculty attitudes, in terms of culture, in terms of tradition, so much of what you say, of course, resonates, as you're probably aware with that. I mean, a faculty member told me a few years ago, my graduate student doesn't get a faculty job, I consider them a failure. Things like this. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of educating faculty.
And thank you for that. And I'm really excited about this first meeting we're having with a group of scientists and a group of humanists in a couple of weeks, and of smartest, to talk about where are the commonalities that might open doors for things like certain kind of skills workshop. And you're just reinforcing, I hope that might work. Now, I'll confess, I'm kind of surprised at what I am not hearing. I haven't heard anybody talk about monographs or traditional dissertations.
I missed it a little bit.
Okay.
So I said a significant piece of scholarship, regardless of discipline, is what I don't have to think of as essential to any PhD. And that led to a little discussion about interest in alternative forms of doctoral dissertation. A lot of talk about that, but we're curious to know what one might look like and whether our colleagues would think of them as rigorous enough or sensitive enough.
So I am going to be fascinated at Iowa to see where this conversation goes, because here is my observation about culture change. Most groups will say, well, of course, change is, we're people who are change agents. We like new ideas until they have to change something they do, And then suddenly it gets personal and there's no way, no, we never give up that. And so there are going to be a lot of topics we're going to trip over like that in this process. And here is my very simple question to myself. That question is, if a student tells me I have absolutely no interest in being a faculty member, being a professor, and this person is not angry or disillusioned, they just don't want to do that. But they really love reading deeply, thinking deeply, marshaling arguments, doing complicated research, learning about the past. What benefit is it to that student to write a monograph? That's my simple question to myself. And so far I can't answer that question. I can see a lot of benefit to that student learning how to do a focused, intensive research project that requires working in a longer form than an op-ed or even a short report. I can imagine a project that would require many of the same kinds of research, skills, expertise that might be articulated much more engagingly and powerfully in a museum exhibit. And if you ever curated an exhibit, you know how it is just unbelievable. The work and the layers. It's almost like suddenly you're having to write an article in 3 dimensions. And you're having to anticipate audience in new ways that I personally find exhilarating. How do most people get their information now, including your colleagues, if you're a faculty member? There are people still reading books, but every editor at a press will tell you there aren't as many people, and our institutions have disinvested in monographs. We don't subscribe to university presses automatically the way we used to. We have disinvested. And if that's happened, then how is that commensurate with continuing to insist that only monographs matter? I think that's a real moral question as well as a pragmatic question. So, there are experiments that we're seeing emerge around the country. At Iowa, we have our first student who's producing a podcast in place of a dissertation. And like, as with an art project, she's having to offer a rationale for doing so. She's having to explain and defend it. And it has to be substantive. It has to be substantive. But it's going to take place in chunks of time rather than in written chapters. A journal that you all publish here, the Imagining America Journal Public. I co-edited an issue on digital engagements recently, and it was fascinating that what they tell people who submit articles, quote unquote, they say, what do you want a reader to do for 20 minutes? I love that. So some readers will want to read for 20 minutes, but other readers might prefer to watch a video for 20 minutes or read with occasional inserted videos. Some people might like to listen to podcasts. One of the people we worked with had an essay, but it had examples of, it was about digital music. So you listened to the essay, and you weren't allowed to just add a lot of sound files. You had to take into account, you're still expecting a person to do something for 20 minutes. That means you get fewer words. If you experimented with digital storytelling, another practice I think is really on the horizon in the humanities. We're so used to thinking, if you're in English, not that I should say that images are illustrations of words. But digital storytelling asks you to respect the fact that images are information and sounds are information. So that if you tell a digital story, there will be whole paragraphs that would have been in your essay describing what the house you grew up looked like that now are replaced by an image, picture of the house you grew up in. And so there's a lot of rethinking going on about knowledge dissemination. And it's another great example. Okay, here's one of my pet peeves about us academics, and that is we approach only our own work as a research project. So you get assigned to be on a committee, and you've got 10 brilliant people in the room, and they're asked to do X, and they act like nobody ever thought of that before. Instead of using their research skills and looking around to see what's already been done, what are best practices, let's save ourselves a lot of time, and then moving forward. And I kind of feel like that now about the monograph and the dissertation monograph. What's being done in other disciplines? What are people experimenting with? And I'm really excited that next year part of my work will be to learn about that. I will share anything I find and be grateful that you share things with me. I think part of what we're trying to do is figure out equivalencies. That what is the equivalent learning experience to writing a monograph, to writing a dissertation? What kinds of activities would be equivalent, the kind of work involved? And how would you make an argument for a form for that work based on who you want to engage with that work and what you want to accomplish? Yes.
I have a different area of the traditional view of what a strong graduate program provides that gets into a larger concern in terms of institutional structure. So on my list, because I'm in rhetoric and composition, which is a heavily teaching-oriented field, is teaching experience, knowledge about teaching, immersion in conversations about teaching. So that's a little bit specific to my department, but you touched earlier on the issue of TA lines being connected with teaching. And for me, this gets into an ethical issue. In my field, we know why it's important for students to think about teaching and talk about teaching if they're preparing for academic jobs. If they're not, then why are we spending time on this? And as a university, if we are diversifying opportunities for students, how do we justify paying people the stipends they're paid to teach our classes when they have no future use for that experience? And that's been something that's been on my mind as I've been thinking about the shift we're talking about.
Well, I was telling Glenn and Vivian a story last night. There's this wonderful group. There's several groups now, and I'm not sure I'm matching over. But there's one group, I think they're called Beyond the Purgatoriate. But anyway, they're two women who PhDs, historians. Is Martin Wood, is that her group?
Yeah, that's her
group. Yeah. So Martin Wood gave a credit, one of the people who does this coaching of faculty and students, but and she said, okay, you've taught 4 years while you were a graduate student, often in a writing class, with an emphasis on writing. In other words, in another world, you have done 350 multimedia presentations. I'd never thought about that, teaching that way. And it was such a great little concrete example of thinking about of being, I'm trying to think of what right word to describe this. I mean, metacognitive sounds so academic in a fortunate way. But of really thinking about what is happening in the work that we do at the level of what we're learning, what we're experiencing, what skills we're developing, along with the content we're teaching. And I think most of us teach thinking so much about content. Now, in places like writing departments, you all are much more self-conscious about pedagogy often than people in a lot of other humanities disciplines are. And I think it's that self-consciousness in a good way about pedagogy that really does help us, it could help people think about what are the multiple things they're learning in the process of teaching that could be really beneficial in different sectors. And also, I see is it time for us to wind that with you?
Well, we're 15 minutes over.
Oh, my God. Oh, our patience, though.
But, no, I'm aware of the room and turning it over for.
There is a cushion, I checked.
Okay. There's a little bit of a cushion, but I want to give people a chance to communicate, grab a little coffee on their way out. But I wanted to say, I think, to answer Lois partially, maybe this is a resource that we could share if you're willing. I believe last time you were here on campus, Teresa had some slides that sort of helped, like very quickly, as PowerPoint can help you. PowerPoint is a distillation. It's not, people are always like, PowerPoint. And I'm like, no, it's boiling it right down. You take the 40 gallons of sap and you have 1 gallon of maple syrup. It's good. To use a little upstate metaphor. But you had these, I can almost see them in my head.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
There are these charts where it had like, here's the skills that we know we do and teach and mentor our students in and that they gain robustly in our doctoral programs over here on the left-hand side of the screen, and over here was like little arrows and said, but this is how you could talk about it or imagine it for the public sector. So some of it is about rethinking our entire approach, and some of it is not, it's about reframing it. But we lack we lack imagination, we lack the experience and we lack the expertise beyond the academy to have the language and the framing to give it. And the minute I saw that chart, I was like, oh, that makes total sense. How come I couldn't think of that? Well, I'm embedded in my own institutional culture and of course the practices. So we might be able to share that
I'll just
resource.
tuck those two
But that could be
slides
helpful.
back into this presentation. So thank you all for your patience. And I'm really excited about hearing this afternoon, more specifically today, what the different groups are planning to do. And I'm grateful for the chance to learn from you all. We should stay in close touch as I launch my experiment at Iowa. But, again, congratulations on the Next Gen grant. It says that people at the endowment have a lot of confidence in their university and all of you. So I can't wait to see what you'll do. Thank you.